My name is Edmund Morris. I'm a professional writer, the author of 6 books, and my literary awards include the Pulitzer-prize and the National Book Award for biography. I want to apologize in advance for the autobiographical tone of what I have to say to the committee. But I can think of no better way to convey how much in the past I have owed to the New York Public Library as a great research institution, and how little I will owe it in future if it goes ahead with its implosive plan. Perhaps I should say explosive, in that Norman Foster's announced intent is to forcibly replace the solidity of the stacks with the vacuousness of public space. I came to New York in 1968 as a young immigrant looking for work, and to while away the weeks between job interviews, I became an habitué of the Library and Museum of the Performing Arts at Lincoln Center. There, listening to old 78s in the Rodgers and Hammerstein archive of recorded sound, I became inexplicably interested in the long-forgotten Russian pianist Joseph Levin. Simply by poking around in card catalogues and talking to library specialists in the history of music and the history of New York City, I found that Levin had lived in Queens for years, taught at the Juilliard School in Manhattan, and given annual recitals in Town Hall, attended by many of the great musicians of the day. I filled out a call slip and was presented with a file of articles about him, clipped from various newspapers and magazines by some anonymous person who thought they belonged in the New York Public Library. Next thing I knew, I was interviewing his widow, the piano pedagogue Rosina Levin, and hearing her reminisce, to my incredulous delight, about weekends at Yasnaya Polyana with the Tolstoys. Not knowing quite what or where Yasnaya Polyana was, I returned to the library, went to the local history division, and was enlightened. Willy-nilly, I found myself working longer and longer hours in the Performing Arts Library's music division, sitting often beneath Willibrord Mahler's oil painting of Beethoven, which used to hang there for any citizen to see, but is now stashed out of sight, or who knows, already sold for cold cash in the wake of Asher B. Duran's Kindred Spirits deaccession by the library in 2005. It never occurred to me then that I would one day write a life of Beethoven using the facilities of this same division, which, by the way, has now been amalgamated with the once proud and independent dance and theatre collections into a large, ill-vacuumed room staffed by an overworked assistant and protected by comatose security. Put simply, the New York Public Library made a biographer out of me. It taught me where and how to search for forgotten riches in what John Keats called the realms of gold, book stacks and folio drawers that preserve the papered past. Few riches accrued to me personally to begin with, but they're for free, always available, and generally delivered to the pickup window within half an hour, were most of the print materials I needed to consult in order to write the life of Theodore Roosevelt, your predecessor, Mr. Kellner, as Assemblyman from the Silk Stocking District of New York. Just down the corridor in the manuscript room, I found the handwritten draft of his magnum opus, The Winning of the West. By the way, TR too began his career as a published writer in the New York Public Library's original building on Astor Place. Since the day I started working on The Rise of Theodore Roosevelt in the main building of the library in 1975, I have written 5 more books and my wife, Sylvia Jukes Morris, 3. All of these, and both of us, have benefited from the magnificent research facilities of the New York Public Library. Like many scholars who request delivery of rare items, we've learned to brace for the phrase, "not on shelf," on call slips, indicating that some other reader was enjoying first dibs. But over the past decade, I have noticed a steady increase in the return of slips marked off-site, which usually means that some book or document that used to be in the stacks has been relocated to New Jersey. Off-site also means that if you're so unfortunate as to be a researcher from outside the city, flying here from Lisbon, for example, to avail yourself of the library's unequaled wealth of books on exploration, you're going to have to wait 2 days or maybe 5 days over a holiday weekend to get what you could have gotten in half an hour in 2003. A further implication of the dread phrase off-site means that the item you've ordered, let's say a big old fragile bound volume of Charles Jarvis's translation of Don Quixote, is going to be hauled off a shelf somewhere near Princeton, piled along with other arcane stuff in the back of a truck, bumpily schlepped to Manhattan through the Lincoln Tunnel, transferred to a cart in the bowels of the Fifth Avenue branch, and shoved onto another shelf to wait your return visit, possibly losing a few crumbling pages in the process. Efficiency and economy will of course require that the above-mentioned truck be loaded as fully as possible, coming and going, so you have to hope that it won't collide with an 18-wheeler somewhere south of Newark. The last time I was presented with a bunch of off-site slips about a year ago, I said to the guy at the reference desk, "I thought a library was somewhere books are stored." He said, "Sir, it's only going to get worse, and I can't tell you how I hate having to work here now." He was right. It has gotten worse. In fact, the latest is that the stacks now store nothing but air, and very soon they too will be off-site. In conclusion, and in fairness, I acknowledge that the New York Public Library is making a courageous and not unimaginative attempt to adjust to the digital revolution, which promises to be as world-changing as that of print 7 centuries ago. I also acknowledge that 1.5 million of the books that were destined for off-site storage are going to return when and if the new stack facility under Bryant Park is constructed, thanks to the generosity of Abby and Howard Milstein. And surely none of the real estate drunk billionaires on the library's board is proposing that its most precious holdings, the manuscripts, the incunabula, the art, the ancient maps, should be removed elsewhere. But the fact is that an exquisite repository full of high-piled books in character is now going to be turned into a populist hangout and have its former stack space stuffed with more and more and more and more miles of computer cable. That's okay for scholars whose attention span extends back no farther than the early 1980s. But for those of us cognizant of what happened to civilization after the great library in Alexandria burned down, can only think with trepidation of what the Central Library Plan is going to do to the historical memory of New York. Mr. Assemblyman, until this plan was announced, my wife and I always intended to leave our research archive in gratitude to the New York Public Library. As collections go, it's modest, but it does contain a mass of primary materials on 3 eminent New Yorkers, Theodore and Edith Roosevelt and Clare Boothe Luce, as well as hundreds of biographical files on Beethoven, Ronald Reagan, and Thomas Edison. We've changed our minds about this bequest. Not one sheet, not one card or cassette, if I may use that extinct word. We do not want to think of such quaint artifacts ending up one day off-site in New Jersey or spilling from an overturned truck on the turnpike and blowing across the meadowlands to settle on some lost fragment of Penn Station.
Mr. Morris, we thank you for your incredibly eloquent display of how a researcher uses the stacks so wonderfully.